while the female settles in,
What are you doing?
the male takes the opportunity to go fishing.
Do you like being a dinosaur? Do you like the dinosaur?
Hey, I'm Kev. I hope everybody had a lovely holiday season with their family and friends. I'm sorry I'm very late with this video. I've kind of been caught up with, getting back to work, and I've also been, if I'm going to be completely honest, I've also been, procrastinating on making videos and getting back into the swing of things, because culture part of this gender war is, it just gets more insane every day. Like, there's more nonsense and, just ridiculousness every day. So kind of, I'm and ah about continuing involvement at all, and then, I'm and ah, and you think you've got a video, you think you've got something, and you start filming, and then you kind of go onto social media and something else has been set on fire, and some other way, or some new outrage has happened, and you kind of, you can get like, just even knowing where to start with some of this stuff can be, like a thing in itself. So I've kind of let myself just wander around in circles thinking about lots of different things for the last few weeks. But yeah, I lurk a lot on social media and kind of private message a fair bit. So I've watched a lot of what's happening. And I've been thinking about perspectives a lot recently. Like, having been around for a long time kind of means I remember what things used to be like, for the most part. Like our lives are saturated with social media at this point, but that's really a recent phenomenon. Like, up until, say, the last probably decade, like, there were people, everyone was kind of mostly on social media, but it wasn't as fundamentally a part of our life as it currently is. Like, this is a new development that we're kind of struggling to cope with, or to deal with, or to integrate into our lives. But up until this point, like, previous generations, like, of trans people, we had, email chains or email groups, or, like Yahoo email groups were a thing for a long time, where we kind of touched on the larger issues of, like transition and processing and dealing with stuff. But just the nature of, how big those places would be, and, like what the dynamics were. It's only really been in the last couple of years, in the last decade or so, where there has been any kind of platform available for, Joe average trans person to, talk about the reality of their day-to-day exchanges, or like, to make Jake to, like, the multiple variations of trans people and trans experience has not been visible at all, or even available to be visible at all to the mainstream before, very recent history. So there's, there really hasn't been anywhere where there's been like a place for wide-ranging discourse, or, talking about experiences, understanding experiences, or for trans people talking about the nitty-gritty details of how they coped, or of how we coped with transition, what our strategies were, techniques for certain, like, just really banal day-to-day things like pronouns and partnerships and work relationships and things like that. Like, we talked about those things privately, of course we did, like, with people in our lives and things, but there hasn't been a platform for that information to be placed before now. And even now, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be part of, like, it's not necessarily part of the mainstream. It's just, if someone wants to go digging, they can find this information now, which is good and bad, which I'll get to in a minute. But, like, there just really hasn't been any place apart from our memories, like from trans people's memories or, allies' memories, friends and families' memories for these places, like, there's been nowhere for this information to be stored other than in our brains, which is kind of really interesting watching a lot of this stuff unfold at the moment. There was always a few trans people that, made it onto the Maury show or Jerry Springer or even, like onto more mainstream chat shows, but there was always kind of like a carnival kind of angle to that. Those shows were always interested in the most sensational aspects of what it is to be trans, like the day-to-day boring, going to get the grocery stuff was not sexy enough for those shows. So, the trans people that managed to break through the mainstream to tell some of these stories had just an incredible amount of pressure from within the trans community to behave and to make their stories as not lie per se, but make their stories as representative for the whole community as they possibly could. Looking back, I didn't really ever participate in any of that sort of stuff. I always thought people are just people, and that when someone saw an interview with Buck or Carlotta, or that when the average person saw that, they were seeing a snapshot or a window into that person's specific trans experience, and that wasn't. I kind of trusted people to understand that wasn't necessarily the case for everybody who came under the trans umbrella. But there was a lot of pressure placed on, or a lot of expectation placed on the people that did go on mainstream media to be as all-encompassing as possible. It still kind of happens to a degree. But yeah, I've been thinking about it, like for generations now, the whole born in the wrong body soundbite has been doing a lot of work filling the mainstream space. And I mean, in some ways it encapsulates, conveys the most information, the most accurate kind of thematic information in the smallest amount of words or brain space. So in some ways it's good that happened, that's been hanging out in mainstream dialogue or discourse for forever. It kind of has it does have its flaws in that, like it's a snapshot, it's not reality. It doesn't leave a lot of room for nuanced views. And I don't actually know many trans people that would say, they were literally like they were born in the wrong body. Like, that is kind of like this. It's not actually how most people frame their experience from what I've seen. Like, most people have a much more nuanced view of what their transness is and what it means to them and what it means in general than just being born in the wrong body. But considering that there has been no realistic mainstream, there hasn't been a plethora of realistic mainstream representation, really. It's done an okay job, and for the majority of trans people who just wanted to pass and integrate and live their lives in the wider community or in LGBT spaces like that, there hasn't been spaces for these things to be overly picked apart has been great, because like, I got away scot-free. I've had a lovely, wonderful life that I'm really appreciative for. But I've been thinking about some of the unintended consequences of just that being the case, one of the flip sides of there not being any room for this conversation in a nuanced and realistic way is that it's created this massive vacuum that, it just lacks nuance, and nature. What's that saying? Nature abhors a vacuum. So, like it's always going to be filled with something. And quite often with trans stuff, decently sized cohort of people that have bad intentions and just hate the guts out of this and will do everything in their power to fill that void with misunderstanding or fear mongering or misrepresenting, going into trans spaces and finding the extreme outliers of people behaving just abhorrently or illegally or really bad surgical results, and kind of they go in and grab screenshots and then go over to some other part of social media or media in general and find the largest rooftop to scream it from. It means that it has meant that there's a lot of nonsense in this area about this subject as well. A lot of people they're going into private spaces where trans people are talking about their experiences openly and honestly, and these people have bad intentions, so they go in looking for the most sensational, bad looking, kind of experience so that they can go and convey that bad experience in the worst possible way and act like it is an average experience or an average situation or, blah, 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 blah. It's just, gets a bit eye rolly after a few decades, but there have always been people that have been around doing that sort of stuff. And I was thinking the other day about, like I came out, transitioned, there was no social media, nowhere for me to put my story for other people to see it. I'm out, so if people approach me, then I'll, talk to them about this sort of stuff. But as the technology has changed, what used to be private email forums or chains or things like that has slowly morphed over time with, this younger generation that are used to putting their, intimate stuff up on social media. Pardon me, for an audience of people who feel the same way that they do or have the same experiences or can relate to that. They create like little bubbles of solidarity, like some of these kids have gone on to, or some of the younger generation have gone on to, newer more technological sites like, say, YouTube, where, they go looking for video chats of, trans people talking about their experiences, because it's an easier way to convey and digest information. So, of course, they started going to YouTube looking for trans people talking about their experiences. And of course, the older generation are late adapters to technology, and our transness is not as important. Well, it's not as prevalent in our day-to-day thinking as it once was. So the thought of me talking about the nitty-gritty of my transition and posting that, making a video of it and posting it online is really only something that I would do under duress, and if I thought the situation was dire enough for that to be required, that I would give up my anonymity. But the younger generation see that as average. So of course the people that then started putting their trans stories on YouTube and TikTok and making videos about these sorts of things were younger people. They're talking to, to them, the demographic of people that they make up. They think that they're talking to an audience of themselves, and you can see that they're doing it with good intentions. Like about, it must have been 2010, I was dating a woman whose flatmate started transitioning. Yeah, no, he started making videos about his transition and posting them on YouTube, probably 2010-ish, maybe just before then. I don't know, it's going back a while. But he was doing it purely, he was almost 30, but he was doing it purely to help other people find resources that helped them. And he took the responsibility, he developed a pretty decent following fairly quickly, and he took that responsibility quite seriously and realized that there was room for what he was saying to be misconstrued, because he was 30 and an adult and aware of, like the concept of, he couldn't control his audience. But when you're talking about some of the younger kind of kids that became influencers, I kind of think, I don't think that I don't think that they're acting in bad faith. I don't think that they are mean-spirited in any way, shape, or form. I kind of think that it was just an accident, like that vulnerable kids might, binge watch all of their content and go looking for other content, trans content to binge watch. I don't know that, because people have, especially Americans, have a freedom of speech. I kind of think that was almost a perfect storm in a way for, these kids to come up with content that was needed, because my generation didn't fill that void and the generations after me didn't fill that void. We just quietly transitioned and went off and lived our lives. If there wasn't a need for that content to be filled, then there wouldn't be, there's a decent chunk of trans kind of influencers with nearly 1 million followers. Like, millions of people watch these videos. Like, who knew that there would be such an interest, or such a, that people would want to, know about this stuff? Like, it just never occurred to, it seems like a ridiculous idea to people of my generation and older, I suppose. In some ways it just seems so surreal. There's just I keep thinking about the generational shift of, there's such a clear, my generation was very much, the theme was, you'll get what you're given, and kids should be seen and not heard, it sounds really awful and draconian, but the flip side of that is that we did learn to entertain ourselves and be self-disciplined, and sitting at a restaurant listening to adults speak for a few hours over dinner was kind of, I don't know, I kind of look back and enjoy really doing that stuff now. But like I learned a lot sitting at that table, being bored out of my brain, listening to adults prattle on about whatever they were talking about. But then, I go to work now and you have, a table full of kids, and they all have, games or TVs or iPhones that they're being entertained with. Like, it's gone from you'll get what you're given to it is a human right in a very short period of time. Like, I don't know that we've necessarily caught up with that yet. And I'm watching a lot of, I'm watching a lot of adults that are really intelligent and articulate and, kind of almost experts in the field, kind of single out this trans part of the culture war and behave like it's not connected to every other aspect of the culture war that's currently brewing. It like that this is like a standalone, subject that isn't related to, the other things, blah, 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 blah. Like, it just seems coming in late and trying to make sense of all this and figure out what exactly is going on is quite telling. It's quite confusing to know. Like, I can't figure out what to believe and what not to believe, because I'm seeing hyperbole, and ridiculousness just on both sides. It's ridiculous some days. It's hard to know what is going on, because both sides are playing it up like it's the end of the world. and civilization as we know it, if this does happen, and it's the end of the world and civilization if it doesn't happen. So it's like, and in the middle, there are generations of trans people who have made it to their destination. You know, like I know trans women who are embedded in relationships in the lesbian community, and I know like almost half the trans guys I know are having sexual relationships, casual, long-term, committed relationships, like every kind of variety, with, you know, gay men in the gay community or in aspects of the gay community. Like, so these kids are coming through and everyone calls me he and Kevin, and, you know, like I have made it. So they, like, this generation of people have come in and seen how the end result of where we've gotten to, but the information of how that occurred, like the day-to-day average Joe blogs, how that happened step by step, how that came about to be the case, is just nowhere. So I kind of think in some ways, like, I don't know that I really blame them for being as pissed off as they are about some things. I think that they carry on in, you know, like in I think they carry on in uncharitable ways about things and joke about, you know, things that they shouldn't be joking about, and that, you know, then gender critical people come along, or gay people come along and see those posts and, you know, are rightly outraged, but take them at the same time, you know, a bit more seriously than they perhaps should, which is going to get me into trouble. But, you know, like some 15-year-old banging on about how cis people this or cis people that, like, I tend to kind of just think, oh, hopefully they'll grow out of that, like piling on or being outraged about those sorts of posts. Like, you're not going to change anybody's mind by coming at them. It's very strange. And I kind of like this whole perception thing, you know, like there's just so much room for things to be misconstrued on this, like when it comes to this subject, because we don't know. Like, there's so much about this that we don't know. Like, we know next to nothing about any of this stuff, what it means, where it comes from. So, you know, you have all of these people gesticulating wildly that it's this and nothing else, or that it's that and nothing else. And they're, you know, like there are people that should know better that are carrying on like, oh yes, it's definitely, you know, trauma, or it's definitely mental illness, or it's definitely this, or it's definitely that. Like, I saw a podcast the other day where the guest was talking about, you know, sexologists and sex researchers think that that transness is somehow innate, that it's some kind of, you know, embedded, born with, you know, triggered by something internal kind of situation, and that it's, you know, people like psychiatrists and counselors and, you know, medical doctors who think, that are not specialists in this area, who think that it is a mental illness or cultural. Yeah, and this was a statement made in a podcast that was then ignored straight away, like just dismissed out of hand. They just kind of went, okay, and then moved straight on to the next subject without exploring any of it, and then spent the next half an hour or so just ignoring that, like just completely ignoring that there is a strong possibility that all of this stuff is in some way innate, like whether it's then triggered by cultural stuff or like how it works, we don't know. But it's very interesting that there's this big group of people that are determined to get to the bottom of something, and they're dismissing half of the possibilities out of the gate. You know, it's very interesting. I kind of see this about, like, there's so many, one of the many posts about, you know, you cannot change your biological sex. And I like, don't get me wrong, I know I'm biologically female, like I've never had any doubt about that. But the fact that I'm biologically a female doesn't really play like a very massive role in my day-to-day experiential sex life. Like it's not the biggest deal in my world. So, you know, you have people. These are complex issues. So you have people talking about you can't. You know, all of these bloody posts about you can't change your biological sex when they're talking about, you know, you can't change your chromosomal sex, you can't change your reproductive sex, blah, 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 blah. But I was thinking about this the other day, like those biological aspects of your sex don't really come into, you know, they don't really come into importance that much in your day-to-day experience. So, you know, it's really your physical self and how other people view you as your, you know, your gendered kind of existence that is king in your day-to-day experiences. So you've got people disagreeing about like just the most basic stuff on the internet. And you can see, like, you know, this has been brewing for a few years now, like people going, you can't change biological sex, and then trans people coming along and kind of flipping the bird at them a little bit and going, well, I already have, so fuck you, go away. Like, I kind of wonder if there isn't, like, if people want to resolve this in a way that actually works, and it means that this subject doesn't keep popping up every, you know, decade or so with some new outrage. Like, we kind of need to find the language to talk about this in realistic terms, figure out what it means, because it certainly doesn't mean that I'm a woman. That is abundantly clear to me. Taking hormones changes the way, like, it doesn't just alter your physical body, like it changes the way you process information, it changes the way you process emotion, the way you know, the way I reflect upon the world and the way the world reflects upon me has shifted just so dramatically. I was listening to what's her name, Kathleen Stock, talk about the legal fiction thing. And I can appreciate what she means, but it's not fictional. Like it is reality, and it's not delusional, because it's not just my reality, it's the reality of people who are dealing with me as well. So, you know, you have experts trying to find their footing, and they've got, I kind of think there might be something down that road, but it's like, it's not that. I don't know, you know, you just have these massive condescending kind of blanket statements about something that is just so complex and so inherent to who we are as individuals and how people relate to us, that is like this fundamental thing that's just being dismissed out of hand, or being talked about like it's irrelevant, or it's very strange. Transition and trans people have been around for a long enough period now that, you know, assuming like we're just so not going anywhere, like thinking that this can be reversed and that entire societies are going to forget that this ever happened and denounce, and trans people are just going to suck it up. And, you know, there are so many premises to these arguments that are just faulty, like from the first step. Everything that's built on them afterwards, even if they are interesting or coherent points, like they're built on faulty logic, in the same way that queer theory is being instituted or integrated in physical ways, instead of, you know, they're trying to like physically establish something that is, or embody something that is theoretical. I kind of think that at this point, thinking that you can turn $1 trillion industry around to the point where it doesn't exist is a utopian idol. And there have always been real issues that transness brings up for trans people and for society that need to be, like, we need to find answers to how to integrate all of this stuff. Like that's been very clear to me for decades. I don't think that it's going, I don't see how a constructive debate is possible, or constructive conversation is possible when there's just so much that is misconstrued from the get-go. Like, there's so much that's ignored or overlooked or, downplayed. I don't think you can get an answer without actually, looking at that stuff and seeing it for what it is rather than what people want it to mean. Like, there are a lot of people that want it to mean nothing. There are a lot of people that want it to mean everything.
Leroy, however, is not so keen. What's going on, buddy? What's going on?